Welcome to another episode of Swallow Your Soul Podcast, where we'd rather have a bump in the night over a bump down below. We promise you humor, folks, and it doesn't get any funnier than that. I am your host, Justin Bennett, and with us tonight we have Miles Shapiro. Miles, are you ready to get your weird on?
Oh, yeah, always ready.
All right, man, and you sound ready tonight, man. I tell you what. So last time we were here, we were doing a part one of aliens, visitors, ETs. We were getting down the list, but that the podcast, it was getting pretty long, so we had to cut her short. But now we are here tonight to bring part two to you. And I think we were right about the area of talking about abductions, what they were doing, why people are allegedly abducted. What was the purpose? And I was going to tell this quick little funny story. I've tried to watch every documentary I can about, all these subjects, but who knows what it was on. And it was this guy who was abducted, allegedly, taken into a spaceship, shown these bodies that are in like these giant test tube type things. And he's like, oh, okay, well, those are interesting. Well, they take him back and he's like, oh, I saw these weird bodies. So then he gets abducted again, but this time when he comes to, he's actually in one of those bodies. In the test tube, he can see like other entities like walking by and looking at him, kind of like how he did that when he was outside of the body. So he thinks these beings were teaching him a little lesson that his consciousness can be kind of moved around willy-nilly. And that was the teaching that he got from that abduction. But kind of just an interesting story I heard of that will always stick with me.
I just heard actually a story that was similar to that today. I was reading on the alien subreddit, and maybe you've heard this story. Maybe it's the same one, but this guy said that he was taken to a craft in some kind of liquid, and he could see people looking at him from the outside. And he was very upset, and he was communicating telepathically with them. And they said to him, you're our portal. And that's all he remembers.
I don't think they got into that detail on the documentary, but that is definitely interesting. I can only guess what they meant by that, but I have a few ideas. But it's definitely similar for sure. But anyway, moving on, we have a little list here. We got a number of things still on it that all kind of deal with aliens, visitors, ETs, and one of the items we could not miss out on is cattle and human mutilations. Very interesting subject there. There, have been reported many moons ago, for a long time, actually, probably hundreds of years, maybe even thousands, that these cattle and animals, really, for that matter, it's not just cows, it's all sorts of different animals, have been mutilated, and body parts have been basically kind of taken from these animals in a very surgical way. A lot of the cases have very similar markings, such as, certain body parts were taken, such as the eyeballs, the mouths, the lips, the anus, organs. And then, of course, what's very odd about it is that there's never any blood around the animal, which makes it truly fascinating. How could, if it was, some sort of animal eating these parts, there's going to be blood. Really, there'd be blood no matter what happens to this thing, unless something came and just sucked the blood right out of it and then dissected it or whatever. But what are your thoughts on that, Miles? What do you think? Is it the government doing it? Do you think it's ETs? What do you think's going on?
I don't know. I've thought a lot about it. It's very odd. There's actually a story I have, a personal anecdote I was when I worked on cruise ships, we would go to this private island that's owned by. It's called Half Moon Key. It's a beautiful tropical island, and it's hardly anybody on there. It's very small. And we just left, and I'm in the crew bar just hanging out, and this guy that I know, he's also an American. He looked completely like in shock and scared, and he begins to describe that was like cut in half in certain parts, right? And I said, there wasn't any blood, was there? And he's like, how do you know that? And I told him that that's it's been reported a lot, and they think it's related to aliens or UFOs. And I don't think that consoled him at all. I think that made it scarier.
Yeah. Well, that's, a lot of these occurrences, before they go out and find the animal mutilated, they see all sorts of like weird lights out there going on. And it's what are these lights? People have even reported like seeing unmarked helicopters out in the field, before finding these animals. So it's another one of those mysteries, man. It's like, what is going on? There seems to be some evidence, obviously there's a lot of evidence of all these dead animals. It just doesn't seem like it's a hoax. It seems like whether it's our government or maybe extraterrestrials taking these body parts, it seems like they're doing it for a reason, and what that reason is, we can only guess, but why, we have to ask ourselves why these areas of the body, the lips, the anus, the eyeballs, do these suck up more radiation than other body parts or something like that? I don't know. But it could be something along those lines. And then Miles, you were even talking about human mutilations, which was new to me. I hadn't really heard anything much about that, but and then you showed me the video where humans have supposedly been mutilated by visitors to some degree.
That's right, and it's not something that's talked about a lot. And actually, you may have mentioned, and if not, you were going to Linda Moulton Howe. That's kind of her thing. She's been studying UFOs forever, and she's a. It turns out that whenever she's provided with evidence of human mutilations, she just changes the subject and doesn't. She just says it's absurd. And that in and of itself is kind of strange to me because, the cattle mutilations are also absurd, but you've apparently bought that, so why? It's just weird.
Right.
But that's according to, I don't know. There's not a lot of information about it. I've seen pictures, it or not. Obviously, it's much more controversial if it's humans being abducted. A lot more implications if the government's involved, obviously, or if they're covering it up. It's probably the latter, at least one of the two. They at least know about it, I think. And I think that I also think that with helicopters going to the areas where they are, it could be that tracking them somehow and then cleaning up the evidence. I'm wondering. But yeah. Could be. It's but there's not too much information. There's a few videos on YouTube, which is not always the best because anybody can put stuff up there, but I'll have to go through and just verify the credibility of these sources. But it's been something that's been talked about for a long time. This topic coming up on Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell, many years ago. So it's
something's going on out there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Kind of leads us to our next topic here, crop circles. Here's another thing that they're all over the planet. A few years back in, I think 1991, a couple of guys came out and said, "Oh yeah, we're the guys doing it." And it's like, I'm sure you guys probably did a number of them, yes, but there's no way you did, 50,000 of them over the entire world this past year. And crop circles, to you people that don't really know what they are, they're basically just these patterns that are created in fields, whether it's grass or some sort of hay, corn, whatever is being grown there, these patterns appear. And again, kind of like the cattle mutilations, people report to see lights out in the field before these creations appear. In fact, there was even a video I remember seeing years ago of 2 or 3 little lights flying around that they thought created these crop circles on film. I didn't know. I never saw if that was debunked or whatever, but it was definitely interesting. But yeah, they're these patterns that are created, and a lot of them, show some crazy tessellation, some sort of pattern. Most of them, are pretty intricate. And they're just very fascinating. And whether, if it's humans doing it to just kind of as a hoax, that is a ton of work. I just can't imagine them doing that for so long and so repeatedly, And a lot of these things that are in the crops, they're very highly, advanced images. Some of them even kind of have to be interpreted or even decoded to some degree. Miles, what's your take on these things, especially because, a lot of people say, they're all hoaxes. But then if you go there and do analysis of the soil and the plants, they weren't bent mechanically. They were bent by, some sort of force that kind of heats them up as well, because all the plants have some sort of like almost bursted part on them where the plant matter like heated up or couldn't sustain the force being put on them, and kind of just bends over the corn. I'm sure you've seen that before, right, Miles?
Yeah, I have definitely seen that, and I tend to think that there's probably something to it based on what I've seen and how intricate they are, and also the people that have looked into it often talk about there being kind of like some kind of heat source that almost burns or sears it, and maybe even like a radiological activity, radiation rather. And then I've also heard people say that animals refuse to go near them, like they can sense something about them. I don't know. But it does seem it's something that people could do, but I mean, with the amount that is done, people doing it for one, and then two, like what would be the need to continue to make so many? It just seems like it would be a strange project to undertake, especially if you're not taking credit for it,
Yeah, I just don't even really think that's a real possibility. Like these pranksters, these hoaxsters are just, hey, we've been doing this for 60 years. This year's going to be the year that we really get them. It just doesn't really make sense. It seems to be, and all the ones that people have been caught making, they are obviously just kind of made with a board with a rope on it that they kind of push around, and all of those corn stalks are basically mechanically broke. They can tell that somebody just took them and bent them over.
Yeah.
Where the other ones with, just so happens a lot of them are even more intricate designs. Those ones have the true markings of the bent over stalk with kind of like a little area that exploded from some sort of heating element, along with the leftover radiation, like you were saying. There's like faint radiological traces left over in a lot of these crop circles. So just another really interesting thing, Next up on the category list is the injuries from interaction with crafts. And this is one of the topics our government definitely doesn't want us hearing much about, but it does happen quite a lot. I know there's well over 100 instances of military and civilians being injured from UAPs. I know one of them for sure was the occurrence at Rendlesham Forest. If you Google that one, you'll see that there were two guys, I think, Pedestin and another guy. I need to sharpen up my history on the subject, but I do remember two guys approached the UAP. One of them pulled out his gun, and the guy who didn't ended up having a lot less health issues, and the guy that did pull out his gun had all sorts of health issues. And the guy who didn't pull out his gun, Peniston, I think was his name, or Pendleton, he basically thought, well, maybe it's because the other dude pulled out his gun that he was injured more. But, it's just kind of a theory. But there are a lot of occurrences of humans being injured by these UAPs, and that's just a fact. There's a document that's been released for the Freedom of Information Act that I'll put a link to the YouTube page here to it. But it's it's very interesting. We don't know. And what the problem is that the government doesn't want to admit that they know about it, and so it's really hard for these people to get help with it.
Yeah, that goes. That reminds me of specifically. I don't know if you heard the abduction case with Terry Lovelace.
Yeah,
that they were. Was it Devil's Mountain in Missouri near a base, which is to live over by there for a little while. But that story is very disturbing, just because not only were they physically injured, I mean, they were, I think, bleeding from the nose. They had sunburn, which is another common occurrence. There's radiation and sunburns. And but just the psychological impact of experiencing something like that and then having to talk about it. I mean, that just has to do a number on your psyche, And so one of those two guys that were abducted, he basically became an alcoholic and just fell apart. So it's very sad.
Yeah. I heard of another case where this UAP landed in this woman's backyard and it blinded her.
Wow.
She's still, like, to this day, can't really see very well at all.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that one really upset me because I've heard of for example, the story from what's his name? From Fire in the Sky, that story.
Travis Walton, I think.
There you go, Travis Walton. He even thinks that the reason they took him on board was because he was injured by the UAP, just kind of on accident. He got too close. Because he describes being like hit with like something that zapped him.
Oh, wow.
And so he says he thinks they took him on board to fix him after they accidentally zapped him.
Wow.
That's what he's saying nowadays. And so you listeners at home, if you want to look into it, there's a movie out there. That's kind of how I heard of the story, but it's called A Fire in the Sky. It's a movie from the early 90s, I want to say.
Yeah, something like that.
And it's a very crazy movie that is pretty accurate to the story of what happened to Travis Walton and his gang of what were they, loggers, I guess. But it's a crazy story. It's supposedly a true story. It's one of the most famous cases in UFO history, really. But they supposedly abducted this man, Travis Walton. He was missing for like 4 or 5 days, and then all of a sudden he is found in a phone booth or something, naked, no clothes, has like these marks on his body where he says, like little drills went into his, eye sockets and all sorts of weird stuff. But it's a crazy story. Travis Walton, Fire in the Sky is the movie. Check it out. The movie's pretty crazy. It scared me first time, I watched it, but it was good.
I read somewhere recently that they did definitely they altered the abduction experience because it wasn't that scary, or they added a bunch of stuff to it because that was terrifying.
When he gets abducted.
yeah, when he gets abducted,
right?
It wasn't exactly like that from what I recall, but it's still a good movie, and it's a good story to know about because he seems definitely credible. He went on Maury Povich. He apparently failed a lie detector test, but those things aren't really that reliable anyway.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
And all his other guys passed him too, I think I read. Yeah, there's, it's the kind of thing that at one point I was convinced he was absolutely full of it. And then the next thing I read, people were like, no, he's very credible. He's never really changed his tale. Is he making some money off of it? Yeah, he is, so you never know. But it's always seemed pretty credible to me, his story.
Yeah, it seems like it to me too. I agree.
Yeah, it seems credible, but then, there's certain aspects that kind of make you question. Like, I think his dad was like a sci-fi writer too. And was always kind of talking about, this type of thing, getting abducted and all sorts of stuff like that.
Oh, no kidding.
And so it's like, oh, his dad was a sci-fi writer and now he's coming up with this tale. It's just, it sounds too coincidental. But, you can't rule it out just because of that. It's maybe you could make the argument that maybe his dad kind of turned him on to this subject. And so when he saw something out there, he was able to see a UFO instead of, maybe if he was really religious, he would have saw an angel, but maybe his dad talking about it allowed him to kind of picture what it truly was in this dimension. Who knows?
And I think he actually came up closer to it than the other people, so that would make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, he jumped out and went and put his hand on it or something. But anyway, look into it, folks. It's a great story. So next on the list, we have all these sites around the world that have pyramids, giant granite blocks, Pumapunku, all these basically giant granite pieces pieced together like a jigsaw puzzle. Just the pyramids of Giza are incredible works of art. So precise, just unbelievably precise with just giant stones. How did they do this? A lot of people say, well, they must have had help, and I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I think humans can do a lot when they put their mind to it. A lot of it is coming out that, they weren't really slaves that built the pyramids. They were maybe middle-class people, and so it's definitely, even to this day, a huge mystery as to how all these things were constructed. It almost seems like there was some sort of technology back in the day that they used, and somehow it just disappeared, or there's just no evidence of what they had. I don't know. But the accomplishments they have are insane,
Definitely. And maybe the pyramids themselves are a form of technology, or they were. And certain parts in Egypt and in South America, there's very similar carved, in the walls, carved figures and symbols that are just uncannily similar. It's just very interesting. There's also a bunch of Egyptian material found in the. I don't know if you saw that, but it's basically Egyptian work.
I did see that on some documentary, actually, which was surprising.
So did they have the ability to traverse all the continents? So it's
And it seems
maybe before the flood, everything was different. Like it's the whole Atlantis thing, maybe.
Yeah. And all these lines, right? All these different, are they ley lines where, a lot of the pyramids fall on? There's supposedly one line that can go through the planet that has like all sorts of different pyramids that line up directly on this one line. I'd have to look into the name of it.
And they line up with the stars?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Especially the ones in Giza. The Orion's Belt, I believe. So, yeah. But, yeah, what you were saying, the pyramids and what their functions were, yeah, a lot of people think they were some sort of like energy plant, if you will, something that created energy based on the geomagnetic location and kind of amplified these waves out into the sky for some reason. People have theorized that based on how the pyramids have like these caverns almost that direct energy out of them. There's definitely some weird stuff going on with those pyramids, and we don't fully understand, what's going on. So they're definitely, and like I said, I'm not going to jump to alien help with all this stuff. They're definitely, I would say, I'm pretty sure that there's some technology, some very, very good technology that has been lost or forgotten. I mean, that seems almost like a certainty to me. I don't want to say it was given to them by aliens or taken away, but it's definitely a possibility,
It's there's something to it, and seems otherworldly. And Graham Hancock is kind of one of the more popular people that talk about these kinds of things.
Yes,
and he's completely shunned by the academic community, which I understand. It's outside of the norm, but that's
right.
That's with everything that's outside of orthodoxy.
Right. Well, that kind of takes
you risk your career by entertaining those.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to the next category, which is out-of-place artifacts. You can Google it, guys. It's called UPARTS, OOP, arts, artifacts, ARTS, UPARTS, out-of-place artifacts. And these things are crazy, man. They're really interesting. I love hearing about them and learning about what people have found. And they're basically the most compelling ones, in my opinion, are the hammer. There was the little rock hammer thing that was found in like 400 million year old rock. And then they had these little metal balls that were found in 500 million year old rock. And they think these little balls were definitely made by, humans, by some intelligence. The hammer definitely was. I mean, that's... but then, other people are claiming, oh, well, the hammer could have, sunken down into a hole and re-hardened or something like that. And it's like, that seems very unlikely in my opinion. But for these things to be found in this 400 million, 500 million year old rock, there's something going on with this too. And is it the same thing? Did we have technology long, long ago that has just been basically erased from, just the sands of time? Were these civilizations on this planet somehow able to get off the planet before catastrophe? Maybe the UAPs we're seeing flying around right now are humans that got off the planet, and they're basically just watching us, seeing what happens with us now. Definitely a possibility. Do you have any UPARTs that you find interesting, Miles?
That's a rabbit hole I haven't gone too far down, but I definitely have seen some interesting things. Like I think there was a giant gear that was found in China way before there's any kind of industrial production. And metallic objects that seem like clocks or computers.
Yeah, the Antikythera.
Batteries.
That's the one you're talking about. I think that's kind of like a giant like clock type of thing.
Antikythera. I'm gonna look that up and learn more about it.
Yeah, the Antikythera.
Yeah, it's very fascinating and mysterious. This is something that could be a whole podcast discussion. But I've heard some theories that purport that maybe the UFOs are time traveling machines. They're time travel machines. Or time machines. That's the word people use. So yeah, if they are, that would explain how modern technology got to the planet 500 million years ago.
Yeah.
I think that's the only explanation I could think, unless it's from some other society that is no longer here, which is possible.
It's very possible, man. I didn't think it was possible until I just started hearing about all these things, all these UAPs, man. And this Earth's been here, 4.5 billion years. Humans have been around for 200,000 or whatever it is. And that's a drop in the bucket compared to how long this Earth has been here,
Yeah, it's true.
So it's very possible that some civilization became advanced and somehow left the planet, and then, everything went to shit. Maybe the meteor came that killed the dinosaurs or whatever, or helped kill them, I should say. It just seems more and more possible the more we find out, especially the stuff that Grant Cameron's always, or I'm sorry, Grant Hancock. I get, there's another guy named Grant Cameron who's in the UAP field, but the more stuff that guy finds out, it just keeps pointing more and more to old civilizations.
Yeah, totally. And there's I was thinking, maybe what if some other animals that came before us evolved intelligently, and we just they just don't interact with us, or maybe they went extinct. I saw that recently there was a discovery of this fossil of this dinosaur called the monkey dactyl, and is a dinosaur that had opposable thumbs. And it was grabbing. They had pictures of it where it was like grabbing insects and stuff. So they say that's the one thing that's separates us from other animals.
Yeah.
So the ability to interact with the environment that way, maybe that's the reptilians. I don't know.
Yeah. Something to it, man. But yeah, so a lot of these ETs, these visitors, people are always saying that there's bases in Antarctica, on the moon, the dark side of the moon, maybe in the ocean. Even over on Mars, people have been saying there's bases on Mars. But really, I think they could be all those places, and we wouldn't really know. There seems to be a lot of UAP activity around volcanoes. I've seen footage where people will basically just aim a camera at a volcano that gets activated upon any type of movement. And they're seeing all sorts of UAPs fly in and out of these volcanoes just randomly. Some of these UAPs seem to fly straight into the rock and kind of just somehow, dematerialize, fly through the rock, and maybe there's a base in there or something along the lines. I have no idea how they're using these volcanoes. It almost seems like they're using the heat somehow. But in the ocean, could definitely be down in there. I mean, we only explore, a small fraction of the ocean at any one given time. They could easily be down there and, not very easily detected. The moon, the dark side of the moon, for sure. We never see that side due to the tidal lock of the moon. They could definitely have bases over there that we only see when we have spacecraft fly around that side of the moon. So, and Antarctica, definitely. There definitely seems to be some shady stuff going on down there. There's certain areas, that it's extremely hard to get to. And with these UAPs being able to fly into volcanoes, I don't think the cold's going to stop them,
Yeah, and it's kind of strange. Every other place on Earth, people And it seems like everyone's just like, oh, that's just ice, just don't worry about that place.
Yeah.
And I've heard some stories. I think there are some remote viewers that found underground bases there. For as credible as you think that is, that's obviously it's no photograph, but it's an anecdote.
Yeah.
But as far as the moon goes, there's some theories that it might itself be a base. I mean, if you look at the moon, they say that it's younger than it should be when they do testing on it. Also, that it's just uncanny that I think it's 400 times smaller than the sun, but it's also 400 times distant. I forget the exact numbers, but it's uncanny that it can completely block out the sun.
Yeah.
It's the perfect size.
Right. No, I know what you're talking about.
Every now and then. Yeah, it's just incredible. And then I've heard people say that the moon rang like a bell, which I'm curious about. I don't know if you've ever heard that before.
Yep. I have.
But how do things ring without any air? I mean, it could be vibrating, but do they just feel it vibrating or something?
Yeah, that's it. I don't know. That's a good point. It would have to vibrate something other than air. That's for sure. I haven't heard much about that, but I definitely have heard, the weird things about it as far as it could be some sort of base. It's just weird how it got to where it is. Like you said, it can perfectly block the sun. It's the perfect distance to block, it perfectly. We only see the one side of it at all times. I mean, there could definitely be stuff going on the other side.
Yeah, and it's also I've heard anecdotes too about the moon being related to the reincarnation trap. I've heard stories of people purportedly going to the light and then going to the moon, and then going back to Earth. It's like a way station. It picks up souls.
Yeah.
That's the theory. But
yeah, the old L. Ron Hubbard idea, huh?
Is that what he said?
He kind of did, which is funny because, his theory is not a whole lot different from some I've heard. But the reincarnation, there's a lot. I mean, that's a whole episode in itself, obviously.
Yeah.
It's a lot of it is like that. Like the soul was captured and it went here for a little while and then got, sucked back to Earth. There's definitely something going on with all that too. So it's like the more I learn about that, the more I'm like, well, maybe that L. Ron Hubbard guy was tapped into like some truth, Obviously, his cult is horrible, Scientology. But maybe somewhere along the road he got a little piece of truth in there. I don't know, but
totally. He was also collaborated with some interesting. I mean, he was friends with Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons, who were like high-level occult / intelligence.
Oh yeah,
people,
especially with Aleister Crowley, and he's actually one of the first people to document meeting a gray ET. He didn't really call the being he met an ET, I don't think, but the name of it was Lam, Lam, I believe.
Yeah.
And he drew a picture of it or painted it or whatever he described it. And the picture of this being that he said he saw all the time looked just like a gray alien. So some people think he was the first. The eyes?
Yeah. The eyes were normal, like human eyes kind of, but that it had the giant head, the small nose and mouth and everything else.
So they say he's one of the first people to report, actually meeting one of these gray aliens or something similar.
And there's actually this group called the Collins Elite that I just learned about recently, that they believe that he opened up a portal, and the aliens that are basically his fault, and they're demons, and they want to keep the information secret to postpone the apocalypse. But
it sounds
it's pretty out there.
Yeah, it's definitely out there.
Yeah. So, but I could see why some people would think that, because I mean, he does these insane rituals for a year-long time, and then he was not complete the rituals, and there could be consequences from that. I'm not an occultist, so I don't know this stuff that well, but
okay.
Well, it's possible he did open some portals.
Yeah, that's, the portals are definitely a good subject we need to get into as well for these podcasts. And a lot of these subjects we've been talking about in this episode and the last one really should be their own podcast. We're kind of just touching upon them a little bit more than our introductory podcast. Kind of just getting a little more info out there. Giving you a little something you can go Google if you want to, the listeners. And this leads us, actually, we're getting toward the end of this list now as far as aliens and ETs, visitors go. But it must be said about the metals from these objects that are being studied here on Earth. A lot of people say, well, what tangible evidence do we really have? And if you look into it, there's actually a good amount of it. There's a guy out there, his name's Gary Nolan, and he is, I think, a Harvard professor who deals with studying materials, the metal materials, and really any material that is supposedly not from this planet. A lot of these UAPs apparently will drop material from them as they're flying around, whether it's on accident or as a little gift to say, here you go, humans, take a piece of this metal and study it. It's hard to say. Nobody really knows that I know of, but it does appear to happen quite a lot, oddly enough. Like, this thing travels across the galaxy and is going to drop a little piece of metal. It's one of those just weird things. It's not fully understood, but it does seem to happen a lot. Especially from UFO crashes, there's metals that are apparently out there. And then from people that are supposedly abducted with implants. He studies all these things, and a lot of the stuff that he has studied, he finds are complicated metallurgic elements that were put together in configurations that we can't even do on this planet. So there's this is just another real mystery. His name's Gary Nolan. Google him. You'll find he is very credible, very smart man who goes through all these different scientific ways of studying these materials. And you just can't, if you start looking into this guy and you're a non-believer, you're going to be real surprised, because this guy, he's not the kind of guy that you can dupe very easily. And he is a firm believer that these things he's studying are not from this planet. And not to put words in his mouth, but I think you'll find that he's on board with that. So with that said, it's kind of getting toward the end of the podcast. We don't want to keep you going too long here, but there's just a few more notable people that I wanted to mention that are kind of associated with this topic. Colonel Philip J. Corso, he was a man, he wrote a book called The Day After Roswell. I actually read that book. It was pretty interesting. I don't know if I believe all of it. But basically this man was tasked with taking parts of the Roswell crash and giving it to modern day businesses so that they can study it and reverse engineer it. I can't remember the specific companies he said he gave these technologies to, but some of them were fiber optics, lasers, transistors, and some other stuff. He mentioned like Kevlar bulletproof armor, and some other stuff. But, the argument is, well, no, those were patents that were worked on for decades and people finally figured them out, which could be the case. It's just a really weird story, but that's Colonel Philip J. Corso. If you're into this field, you'll kind of see him around. He's dead now, but it's kind of a controversial book. Stanton Friedman, also gone, but he was a nuclear physicist, and he was one of the more practical guys in the field. Just everything. He was a very, very smart man. He never kind of took anybody's word for anything. He needed hard facts. But he was a firm believer that these UAPs are without a doubt coming here. We don't know what they are, but they are here. He always agreed to that. So Bob Lazar, this guy gets into, he was on one of Miles's favorite shows. Was he Coast to Coast? Did he call in there when George Knapp was there? Or
I think so, yeah.
I think that was the case where he basically kind of started saying, he needs to get on, he needs to get it recorded before they take him out. But he was on the local news, but he's also on Coast to Coast AM. Okay. And he was over in Vegas around that area at the time. George Knapp kind of brought him to light, if I'm not mistaken. And Bob Lazar always said that he reverse engineered, I think it was 8 different UFOs at the S4 location of Area 51. And Bob Lazar's the guy that put Area 51 on the map, I think, from saying that. Before, it was just kind of like nobody really knew what it was. Jacques Vallée is a guy he's kind of like the godfather of the UFO field. This guy's been in it forever. If you've ever seen the movie, the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, this was the French scientist that Spielberg had in the movie. He was made after this guy, Jacques Vallée. And if you look into his books, they're incredible. He's another guy that does his homework. He never just says something without any proof. But in any real UFO documentary you've seen on TV or online, this guy's probably mentioned in it. He's just one of the best. Jacques Vallée.
Yeah. He's very credible, and he's come up with a lot of interesting and, I think, plausible theories.
Yeah.
And everybody has nothing but good things to say about him.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a real down-to-earth guy. And he's the one that kind of got a lot of these ideas out there in a credible way, where people can kind of quote his work in a credible way instead of saying, oh, this lunatic, this quack. When they talk about him, it's legit. So Gary Nolan, that's the guy we talked about, the Harvard professor, studies the metals. One guy you'll always see in the documentaries, his name's Richard Dolan. Super smart guy. I always like listening to him. He's another guy that, I don't feel like he's easily duped. He does his homework. Right now he's working on a book about USOs, unidentified submerged objects, kind of just like a UAP, but just underwater. He's working on a book that's going to be released soon on that. But you'll see him in all sorts of documentaries, podcasts. I've seen him around for a long time now. Luis Elizondo, he was the guy in the military that was put in charge of ATIP, which was the Advanced Aeronautical. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's basically a division of the military that they created to study UAPs. He was in charge of it, and they weren't helping him. They were kind of standing in his way of trying to really figure out what these things were. They basically said, oh yeah, we're going to give you a little division here, and just kind of say what we want you to say. And Lou Elizondo said, screw that. I'm going to do everything I can to find out what these things are, and if you guys aren't going to help me, then I'm out of here. And so he quit. and then came forward with it all. So I give him a lot of credit. Luis Elizondo, look into him. Stephen Greer, the CE5 protocol. This guy, he didn't invent it, but he promotes it heavily. He's kind of the guy he's the guy now for CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which is where you initiate the contact through meditation. You have all the different layers, Close Encounters of the First Kind, Second Kind, Third Kind is seeing one, fourth is yada yada. I can't remember what they all are, but the fifth one is human initiated contact with them. So CE5. A lot of people are out there. There's an app. Millions of people are doing this now. They're trying to raise the frequency of planet Earth so that we can communicate with all these higher dimensional beings. I can't say I disagree with them, but it takes a lot of meditation, which I'm not very good at. And a lot of it is joining these groups, going out into a field, meditating, and then seeing these little lights fly around, which is super cool. I like that. And you might have experiences beyond that. I just don't really have time to be doing that right now, but if they can help raise the frequency of planet Earth, I'm all for it. Let's see. Chris Bledsoe, he's another guy. He had some encounters, and since then, he just has basically like this telepathic ability to summon these craft. He basically does CE5, but never learned to do it. He just, after this encounter, he was able to do it. And so he can just basically summon these UAPs. They'll come, fly around, he can ask him a question and they'll light up and I'll do all sorts of stuff. So George Knapp, Jeremy Corbell, they have one of my favorite podcasts out there right now on the subject called Weaponized. You have to check it out. George Knapp has been in the field forever. He's one of the OGs. Jeremy Corbell, he's been in a long time. He just released that jellyfish UAP video the other day. So he's heavily in and does a very good job. Anybody else that you want to mention right now, Miles, before we kind of close her down and start working on getting some guests up in here?
There's one guy that I've been reading about and reading his stuff. His name is Jason Reza Giorgiani. He's a controversial figure for good reason, but he has some just really out there information. He has some very he's very opinionated, and he has a lot of conclusions. Some things that I've kind of concluded on my own. And so I was surprised to find someone else that has some of the same ideas. But he might be a good person to talk about, and I would love to interview him because I'd like to challenge him on some of his positions to see what he would say, because you ever read a book and you just want to argue with somebody and figure out what they think. Mm-hmm. I think that would be the guy I want to talk to.
Yeah. I've never heard of that guy, which I'm surprised about, so I'll have to look into him myself, but definitely interesting.
Yeah, I'll send you some information. Again, he's controversial. He's palled around with some pretty extreme right-wing guys, and I disagree with a lot of his political takes, but he wrote this book called Closer.
That sounds like an alien porno.
He did a lot of research. For sure, right? But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys that I would love to talk about, and each one of the people you mentioned, we could do multiple podcasts on them. But I'm glad that you just touched on the basics.
Yeah, we sure could. Yeah, we're just touching and going right now, just a little touchy. But yeah, in the upcoming episodes, we're definitely going to dial in on all this stuff. Basically, we just wanted to give the listener something to go and you can Google it on your own for more information. But I think what we gave you was a little taste to get the old tongue going, as it were. But I think in the next podcast we're going to try to start getting some guests in here, start doing some interviews, getting some fresh material, some fresh guests, new stories you haven't heard, stories I haven't heard. And it's going to be a fun time. We're going to start getting some crazy stuff going on in here. And you can find us on YouTube, Swallow Your Soul Podcast on YouTube. That's where you will be able to find all these podcasts, and we are expanding our platforms as we speak, so you'll be able to find them on other platforms here soon. If you want to email us any experiences you may have, SwallowYourSoulPodcast@gmail.com. Shoot us an email. We'd love to hear from you. And remember, if you're one of those people who crowd the luggage carousel at the airport, screw you. We out.